Welcome back, ladies. Today we're diving into a topic that every woman in midlife needs to know about if we want to age healthily and gracefully. We all strive to maintain our vitality, and to do that, we need to pay attention to what's happening at the cellular level. I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, Gregory Kelly. Gregory is the VP of a product development at Neurohacker Collective, a naturopathic physician and the author of the insightful book Shapeshift. With a rich background, including being the editor of the Alternative Medicine Review Journal and an instructor at the University of Bridgeport, Gregory brings a wealth of knowledge to our discussion today. He has published hundreds of articles on natural medicine and nutrition and has an impressive range of expertise in nootropics, anti-aging, weight management, sleep, and more. So welcome, Gregory, to the show. Super happy to have you here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm thrilled to be here and talking with you today. So it's always nice to, I know the audience won't know this, but just talking with you before we started recording, it was nice to find out a little bit
Yeah.
about where you live. It's a beautiful part of Canada that I've got to visit a number of times. So
Yeah, you actually know about where I live and have been here. So that's pretty exciting.
yeah.
That doesn't happen very often. So that's great. So how did you get it? Like, you have a passion for anti-aging, basically, I would say. Is that correct?
Yeah, at this point, but it goes way back. My journey started after university. I had a Navy ROTC scholarship in the US. And so when I graduated, I at the time it was 4 years active duty to reserve. I did most of that time active duty. And towards the latter parts of that, maybe the last year, I got very much into health. I had started to think, okay, when I get out, what am I going to do? And what I really wanted to do at that point was just get rid of everything except a backpack and kind of like be like the old kung fu character from the 70s TV show, like, and just wander the earth, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I was already like the weird officer that ate well and exercised anyways, but it occurred to me, okay, to do this, I need to be able to take better care of myself. So I just started reading what was available in that mid 80s time frame, and a little bit about herbal medicine, acupuncture, and then kind of the next step is I stopped at the University of Hawaii, thinking, okay, well, maybe I'll go to Asia first. I'll see if I can get a little bit of background in a language. So I started studying Thai language, and
Oh,
which was really hard.
yeah. I was gonna say, of
But
all the languages just to choose to speak, you know?
yeah. Well, and the reason was, so English is almost like a hybrid of German and Romance languages.
Okay.
So we have elements of both.
Right.
Thai is the same for India and Chinese language groups. It's because
Okay.
of Buddhism, it merges a little bit of the two, just like English does. So I figured, oh, if I learn the Thai, I can go in any direction.
Right.
Um, Anyways, long story short, I applied for a scholarship, got it, did a master's in Asian studies, and focused on where plants intersected with medicine. So medical anthropology, nutritional anthropology, I guess would be the way to say that. And met some naturopathic doctors and thought, oh my goodness, their life is super cool. They're actually doing all the things I've been trying to stitch together and hodgepodge here and there. And so it was 93, and started my journey to be a naturopathic doctor. And at that, like, if you'd asked me when I was, coming out of naturopathic school, what question was most important, it would have been more along the lines of, what does health look like? Like, what does
Mm.
real health look like?
Hmm.
And then,
Hmm.
like, what do we actually do to closer get to it? And rather than many of my classmates had been sick, and a naturopath or a homeopath or some alternative figure helped them get better. Mine
Right.
was such a completely different thing that got me there. Wasn't because I was unhealthy. It was more like, okay, how do I stay even more healthy so that I can do more of the things I want for longer? And
Yeah.
so, long story short, like, healthy aging just is a natural progression from that. Is now I'm 30 years older than I was when I started naturopathic school. So
And so did you find the answer?
no, it's but
It's too broad, isn't it?
yeah, it's one of
It's not one
those,
singular thing.
the more you know, the deeper the wormhole
I know.
goes.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but the nice thing is that often what I would almost say principles apply, right? Like, so I think investing in our financial well-being is a good analogy, right? Like, you can get really into the weeds, study every company's report, try to figure it all out. And at the end of the day, I don't know if it was James Clear that came up with this quote or he shared it, but it's something along the lines of, um, success over time is often a matter of just doing the most obvious thing over and over for long periods of time. And for like our financial wellness, that's starting to invest early and not get like carried away in the minutiae, just like, kind of do the most obvious thing. Right. And I think with health, that's often the same, right? But one of the things that changes over time is our knowledge of what would be the best investment can
Yeah.
change.
Well,
Some of them are the same. Oh,
yeah, and
sorry,
you
go
must
ahead.
have seen like an importance though when you looked at, okay, what's most important for healthy aging. Did you hone in on cellular aging, like seeing that that was something that was kind of missing out there in the market? Because I definitely, it hasn't been till this year did I even hear the word senescent cells. And so and I've been in the health industry for 25 years. So it's like, oh, this is, what is this? I don't understand it. And I don't, and so I started going in a deep dive on that. And so you must have also kind of come across it at some point in your career going, this is something that's really important that nobody's really talking about.
Yeah, so what happened I think it was 2014, several people wrote a paper called Hallmarks of Aging.
Hmm.
And what they did in the paper is they proposed nine, basically think of them as categories of things
Hmm.
that, whether we're talking about a fly, a mouse, a monkey, a human, would have in common on some level from aging. So these were things like mitochondrial dysfunction, right? So mitochondria are the powerhouses of our cells, and there can be, like in ovarian cells, it could be, a couple thousand mitochondria in there to power it. Like in a sperm, that's, the mitochondria, what actually allows it to drive the motility, right? So
Okay.
brain, you name it, like mitochondria are, wherever we need energy, there's a lot of mitochondria. So that was one, but one of them was called cellular senescence. And the idea of cellular senescence, and senescence is like the root word, the root would give the word senile. It basically means
Oh,
aged, right? So
okay.
cellular senescence is this idea of aged cells. But specifically, I think a better way to understand them would be the idea of stressed cells. And this kind of oversimplifies it, but it's the most useful way to think about it. So we have healthy cells that are born, live their healthy life, at some point kind of get, wear and tear, old age, they die off and they get replaced by new young cells, right? And that dying off process is something called apoptosis. It comes from a Greek word that means falling off in the sense of a fruit falling off a branch or a leaf falling off a tree, right? So just think the end stage of any cell after it's, worn out is it should kind of fall off of our tissues or fall out of our tissues. And what that visually would look like is the cell just breaks apart and the immune system comes in, gobbles out the little
Bubbles it out.
debris, and then recycles that to, have resources to promote new growth. So what can happen though is that cells don't all go through this natural life. Sometimes they get so stressed out before that that they, like for lack of a better word, aren't allowed to make new offspring, right? And that characteristic of not making new offspring, basically being frozen, that's what classically was thought of going back to the 1970s as cellular senescence, which essentially meant like, okay, we have this cell, it's not healthy anymore, and we're not going to let it make children. Um, and so cellular senescence kind of originated there. But what happened with that paper and the research that led to it was this, and it was really work in the early 2000s, that some senescent cells can resist going through this apoptosis process. Because even a stress cell should ideally go through that, right? We want it to, be eliminated. So with that, researchers started looking, okay, well, like, why are these cells not going through this falling off process? And what happens? Like, are they doing anything good or bad
Could
by
we
hanging
think of
out
it
in?
as like the rotten fruit isn't actually dropping from the tree,
Correct.
and
So
so
the
they
way,
start to build up?
yeah, so the way I described it, because our head of marketing at Qualia Life is a big gardener, home gardener, right? But that's her passion. So when I was trying to explain this to her, I said, okay, go out to your garden and imagine you have, like, a yellow leaf on a plant, right? The natural progression of that's a stressed leaf, is that it should fall off the plant, right?
Yeah.
But what would happen if, that leaf doesn't fall off? And the answer is, well, it's going to attract pests, right? It's going to probably now steal resources that would be better off used for a green leaf. And it may now infect nearby leaves, right? So one yellow leaf becomes two, becomes four, and before you know it, the whole plant's struggling. And so the senescent cells in an aging context are very much like that. They're, whether it's the fruit or the leaf analogy, they haven't fallen off.
Hmm.
And because of that, they're using resources, and often a lot. Like you had mentioned, NAD is something when we were talking before. Like senescent cells use a lot of NAD. They can create like a
Oh.
local deficiency in other cells because they're such voracious consumers of it. Um, so, senescent cells use resources. Two, they secrete things into the microenvironment. So very much like that idea of, a yellow leaf on a plant can cause nearby leaves to become yellow. That was something that scientists found out, that these senescent cells that accumulate with aging can create new senescent cells from otherwise healthy cells. So in a sense, they create so much cellular stress on nearby cells that they can stress those cells out. And so because of that, what's now known is that in tissues, senescent cells that linger, like the ones that resist that falling off process, start to like accumulate gradually, gradually, gradually. But then over time, it becomes like this snowball rolling downhill that by the time, whether it's old animals or old humans, a lot of the tissue can be filled with these detrimental cell types.
Okay. So I want to get it really clear on this. Tell me it right down for everyone, including myself. How does so okay, number one, if it's a hallmark of aging, this process that starts to happen, does that mean that through our lifetime, we typically would start out with not a lot of senescent cells, but over time and with age, different factors, different stressors from our environment, we can start to get more and more of these senescent cells. And it's kind of an inevitable thing that's going to happen to every human. And it's part of the dying process, would you say?
Yeah, correct. So and the way I tend to, like, I always think of transient and lingering senescent cells. So like, say we have one of our listeners is we'll just say like 20 years old and decides, I'm gonna do this endurance exercise thing this weekend, and it would be natural that they would create some senescent cells from that. And what those uh, transient senescent cells do is they kind of call in the immune system to help repair any damage. And what you would find, and they do this work in animals because you have to do biopsies of tissues
Okay.
to really, identify senescent cells. What they would find in a young animal is that, a week later, they'd have all been flushed out. They'd have all, gone through that falling off process. But in an older animal, weeks and weeks later, they would still be there. So they linger. And
So
so,
even with a healthy stress, you're saying?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, like, I remember reading, it was a study. There's a few places like Buck Institute of Aging that are there was a famous researcher that passed away that was, maybe the biggest name in senescent cell research. But I remember reading a paper they did on exercise at one point and cellular senescence. And what they phrased it was something like, in the older animals, there was an explosion of senescent cells after that same exercise. So, not only did they like linger and accumulate as we age, but the same stressful thing creates many, many more of them when we're older.
So does that mean that what is considered healthy stressors like exercise? And I know that there's so many benefits to exercise too, but is there also a detriment then as we age to these healthy stressors? So let's say cold plunging, fasting, uh, sauna, like there's all these like biohacks that are out there that are healthy stressors, considered a healthy stressor. But is there kind of a point of no return? Like if somebody's overdoing those things when they're older, they're going to be creating too many of these senescent cells that we're not going to be able to get rid of as well as if we were young doing these things. I
Yeah,
don't.
I mean, my bias would be that, like, so I would refer to it as the multiple stressor problem. So one, um, so this was a study. I haven't read it in a while, so
We
there may
won't we
be
won't hold you
inaccuracies
to it. Okay.
no, but it was on Army Rangers, and one of this was I bet the study is 15 or 20 years old, but the gist of it was the Army was having complaints from some people that went through Ranger training that they were fatter after it than they had been before, so the most in shape people. So they decided to investigate this. And part of the study was, like Rangers training is a lot. I'm more familiar with the Navy SEALs, just,
Hmm.
way back, but what they go through.
Oh yeah,
But
a lot.
in the study, they were out in the field, so they weren't getting enough food, so they were slightly calorie deprived. They were exercising a ton. They were cold, they were wet, they were sleep deprived. So they stacked all these stressors. And
Right.
by the end of, I don't know if it was a week, 10 days, they had lost weight, they were hungry, their hormones looked a complete mess, like
I bet.
thyroid, cortisol. And then they measured after, and it's called body fat overshoot in research. But what the near term bounce back of that multiple stress is that they ended up more fat tissue in the weeks to a month after that. Now
Wow.
you can recorrect that, but that's what multiple stress does stacked onto the
Yeah.
healthiest, most elite young people, right? So imagine someone that's not as healthy. So I know one
Yeah.
of the this is another study. This goes way back. You can't do this type of research anymore. I think it was in the early 90s. But they knew that sleep depriving animals would cause many of them to die much more quickly. And they would go into like a muscle wasting type of syndrome. So what they decided to do was, okay, well, let's do that sleep deprivation experiment, but we'll give one group a high protein diet. So we'll just give them a lot more protein, but the same amount of calories. And then for a third group, they said, okay, well, we'll just create this really high fat chow, leave it out, and let this group eat whatever they want. And so the intuition of the researchers was that the high protein diet with a normally adequate amount of calories, if the animals were allowed to sleep, would be good. And what they found, it was actually the animals left to their own devices ate about 2.5 times as much food when they were sleep deprived, but outlived the other groups substantially. So when you stacked sleep deprivation with even a normal amount of calories, that wasn't sufficient, right? Because when we're sleep deprived, our body needs more, right? For some
Yeah.
reason, it just seems to. And, so I remember
That's
being at a
interesting.
biohacker conference around 2018. And like many of them, there was someone on the stage talking all the benefits of calorie
Restriction.
deprivation, calorie
Yeah.
restriction. And I'm like, it would be lovely if someone just at one of these ever pointed out, like, and don't do this if you're at all sleep deprived. Right? So,
Which so many people are sleep deprived.
right. And so so in my mind, we always want to make sure we're not stacking stresses, because something that could be hormetic, like, a cold plunge when we're not stressed, may be beyond our tipping point if we were sleep deprived, or, dieting, or, stacking other
Hmm.
things. So,
Hmm.
and so it takes nuance, unfortunately, but,
Yeah. I
we
wonder,
have.
do you think then maybe that's why we become somewhat insulin resistant, or our blood sugar goes up after a bad night of sleep? Like I've seen this like on so many people, including myself, where I have one bad night of sleep and my blood sugar is up the next day.
Yeah, yeah. So sleep. So this would be an oversimplification, but our hypothalamus is the master regulator of everything, right? So that's where appetite, thirst, so hydration, appetite, that has to do with, weight. Sleep, that's sleep drive is located in the hypothalamus. Sex drive is located there. That's where our main body clock is located. It's where we regulate our body temperature. And my thought is what seems to happen in the real world is that one of those other basic needs isn't met. The default is eat more food, get fatter, right? So whether it's we're not getting enough sleep, we're not getting enough hydration, where our body clock becomes a mess, what always seems to happen is appetite goes up to compensate. I don't know exactly why. Sleep, I think, is fairly easy. I'm sure you know the idea of sleep debt.
Of debt,
Sleep debt.
that it accumulates over
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Yeah.
The idea being, if we didn't get enough sleep, like we can't run sleep in the black. It can only run in the red or be paid in full. So sleep debt's this idea, of many nights not quite getting enough, that the debt starts to grow. And in nature, like hibernation or torpor would be like the equivalent, right? Well, what happens when an animal, uh, their brain knows they're going to go into a time and sleep for a long period, right? They gain a lot of body fat
Right.
to make sure that they can survive that. So my thought, like, for sure, humans don't have the hibernatory genes of a bear, as an example, but we do have some hibernatory genes still. And my thought is it's kind of almost that simple. Like, we build up sleep debt, some part of our like evolutionary brain thinks, oh, this person is going to eventually hibernate. I better be prepared, right? And so, like short term, and long term, you see disruptions in things like insulin,
Yeah.
glucose, the kinds of foods even that people are drawn to after they're sleep deprived are often very different than the healthier
Yes.
ones they would want when they've got adequate sleep. So all of those things interact. And, at the end of the day, like I said to start, right, there's often really good strategies, but stacking all those strategies together doesn't mean that they'll all add up.
Yeah, it's so interesting because it's kind of been this ongoing theme in my life for the last probably 3 weeks. And I just released an episode about this on my podcast. And it's coming out actually, sorry, it's not out yet. It's coming out this Saturday. So I just recorded it the other day, but it's all about kind of picking what you're wanting to work on when it comes to your health and not trying to do everything. Because if you're in this world that you and I are in, and you're on social media, you're listening to these podcasts, and it's like there's so many things that you could be working on when it comes to your health, but it becomes a stress. These things become stressors, and it becomes a detriment then to our health when you're trying to do it all. When you're trying to do the cold plunge, go, intermittent fast, you're trying to exercise, you're trying to eat well, you're trying, that it's a fine line, especially as we age. And because we're losing our hormones, and there's all the, as just talking about specifically midlife women, we become really sensitive to stress more than ever. So it's kind of interesting that I've been thinking about all of this, but I didn't put this into place with it, that, hey, there's actually proof that you do these things too much and you're creating a faster aging process because of it, even though these things are known as healthy things to be doing.
And I don't know if it was so I when I first was out of naturopathic school and in practice, I was invited to join Dr. Peter Diadamo's practice. It was in Greenwich, Connecticut back then, and he's the famous for the blood type diet. And that book had
Okay.
just Eat Right for Your Type is the name of it. It
Yep,
had
I
come out
remember that.
just before he invited me. And the reason I got invited in part was we hit it off, but in part, like, there was so many people wanting to get in to see him that the backlog was just insane. So he needed someone new. And I don't know if it was him, but I always think of him when I think of this. And it's the idea too much good can be no good. right?
Yeah.
And I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure he said something along those lines. So,
Yeah.
I just think that's an important way to think about things that, and sometimes good things interfere with great things. So the key is always like, what's the great thing for me right now, and make sure I do that.
Yeah.
And, so I guess like circling back then to like what we started with, like hallmarks of aging, cellular senescence. One of the things that inspired me to want to create a what we call a senolytic product was I was reading the research. This was 2017, 18, and thinking like, wow, this looks like it could be a great thing. Right? Like, and it's so early
Yeah.
in the journey of understanding this that no one, like scientists knew about it, but people like you and average
Yeah.
consumers, like, I mean, it's probably another decade away from where a mainstream audience would know of something like Senolytics or
Yeah.
senescence. And so I remember around 2020, like early that year, like I wanted to take a product. And so, at the time it's like,
Yeah.
how can I convince the other people at Qualia to let me make this product? And at the time I remember saying, okay, they're like, oh, well, will this sell a lot? I'm like, no, LOL. Like no one's even going to know what this is. Well, like we should make it
But we should still make it.
because it's the right
People
thing to
need
do.
it.
Yeah, and there'll be like some biohackers that say like, oh, like I love this. I'm so glad Qualia made this, and there'll be some in the longevity community as well. But we're kidding ourselves if we think this is gonna sell a lot. And now, so we launched it about 2 years ago, this July, and it's by far our biggest selling product. So it's kind of
Get
funny in
out. Oh, that's
hindsight, but
amazing. That's
so.
amazing. Well, I had heard about it because I've heard biohackers talk about it as being one of their favorite products. And so then I was like, oh, what is this? And started diving into it myself and then got connected with you guys. And so I definitely, there was something that I was like, okay, my audience needs to hear about this because we're always wanting to know how do we, slow down our aging process. And we can do so many things. One of them we were talking about prior to the recording, hormone replacement therapy actually helps with that process to slow down the growth of senescent cells. Is that how I would say it?
Yeah, or yes, just the emergence of cellular senescence and the way, like going back to that idea of stress, because we've touched on that a
Hmm.
few times.
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
so most of us have a good sense of stress at a whole body level, but the same things that stress us stress our cells, are also stress the mitochondria in our cells, right? And when a cell is stressed, this again oversimplifies it, but it's a useful way to think about it. Like a healthy cell that gets the right amount of stress, like some hormetic stress, is going to respond by making more antioxidant defenses, basically becoming more resilient, right? So when you
Okay.
think of like,
Which is
the
good.
cold plunge, the
Yeah.
exercise in the right amount, like that's going to help to toughen up us at a cellular level. But
Okay.
if the stress was bigger than that, then there's probably going to be some damage to the cells, right? And what often, and I'm sure listeners may be familiar with an idea called autophagy, but
Hmm.
what often happens is there's some damage inside the cell, to what are called organelles. So think of organelles as the big things inside a cell, right? Like the factory that makes, RNA and DNA and the mitochondria and things like that. So they may get damaged, right? DNA may get damaged. So the next thing cells try to do is repair themselves. So that autophagy repairs damaged proteins and organelles.
Okay.
And what it does is it fundamentally recycles. It breaks those down so the building blocks can be recycled and repurposed. Mitophagy is that equivalent for mitochondria, and what it would do, it would dismantle damaged ones and then rebuild new ones, right? So the right amount of exercise would, in general, cause us to get rid of some damaged mitochondria, replace them with new fitter ones, right? So that would be the second thing. If stress is bigger, is this like damage, but we repair it. And what cellular senescence is the damage is so great that the cell's not repairable anymore,
Okay.
right? And then if damage was even bigger, like stress was even more, a cell may just disintegrate all at once, right? That's called necrosis. We don't want that. And even with once a cell becomes senescent, as I mentioned earlier, the natural progression it should go through is this idea of falling off, like just disintegrating, right? And it's a really organized program, and then the immune system comes in. But what happens when we get older is kind of three different things. Well, like one's called immunosenescence, right? The immune system's just not as intelligent or as fit or as able to find and
As
remove.
resilient.
Yeah. So that's one, right? Two is that we just make more senescent cells from the same stress, as I alluded to earlier, right? As we get older. So that's, like a double whammy. And then three, and this is the idea why senescent cells are sometimes called zombie cells, is I mentioned they can secrete things into the microenvironment around them that do the equivalent of turning more leaves yellow, so making more senescent cells. So that's often called like secondary senescence, but that's where the zombie idea comes in, right? They're taking nearby cells and creating, another
more zombies.
Yeah, right. And so that combination of creating more of these stress cells that don't die off and not dying off is why the zombie analogy is often used for senescent cells. And and then it also looks like as we get older, our genes express themselves. Obviously, we know this differently, but one of those expressions is they just create more senescent cells. So because of that, we're just stacking all these things that essentially tilt the deck against us to have
speed up the aging process.
Yeah. And so what was really cool and what got me excited originally was it started in 2000, I think it was 10. They essentially genetically engineered these animals so that they would find and eliminate any markers of a senescent cell. They would find cells that express that and eliminate them. And what they found in that genetic experiment was that those animals aged way better, lived longer. And so at that point, it was like, oh, like, wow, this is really cool. Like, who knew, right? Like before, like there was always the sense senescent cells had something to do with aging. But that, I think, caused this explosion of interest that, oh, like they're not only something to do, they're like a driver of it. And then what happened around 2015 is Mayo Clinic and Scripps Institute of Aging published a paper. And what they did is they said, okay, well, we know that there's compounds, some plant compounds, some medication compounds that can cause stress cells to finally go through apoptosis. So let's get a listing of a whole bunch of those cells, and then let's put those compounds on senescent cells and just see what happens. And what they found is there were certain compounds, quercetin being one, which is a flavonoid found in onion. Basically, the part of onion we throw away, that outer skin, that's where there's a lot of quercetin. And they would put these on and then notice, oh, like these cells are finally going through apoptosis. We've fundamentally changed their mind, right? Instead of lingering, they're finally going through their natural progression. And so at the time, those researchers coined the term senolytic for these compounds that could make these zombie cells finally like go through.
Turn the zombie back to humans.
Yeah. Or just like get them to finally just go away.
And just die, just go.
And in that study, there was a couple cool things that I think are important to point out. One is that something like quercetin could be a senolytic, but that didn't mean it could get rid of senescent cells in all tissues. Like quercetin in their study, they didn't measure all different types of cells, but they looked at cells in fat tissue as an example, or endothelial cells, which are the ones that line our arteries and vessels. And so it turned out quercetin was good at causing the endothelial senescent cells to change their mind, but not so good at doing anything for the ones in fat tissue. But this other compound, dasatinib, which is an immunomodulator medication, that was really good in fat cells, but not so good with endothelial cells. So they're like, oh, well, let's just put these two together and see what happens. And the combination worked even better than either on their own. And when they gave those orally it was a mouse study, then again, like the older mice became healthier. Their fur looked like young mice, their body composition changed. They were just healthier, right? They extended kind of that health span. And so that, like before, the 2010 study was cool, but we can't genetically, alter humans, right? But the idea, oh, like there's compounds we may be able to take that could convince these stress cells to go away, I think really lit the research community on fire. So since then, there's,
Ah,
that's 8 years ago, 9 years ago, there's just been an explosion. And, one of the next, I think, big leaps was that same research group said, okay, well, if quercetin does this, let's just look at a whole bunch of other polyphenols from plants and see if any other ones do. And at the time, they identified one called fisetin or fisetin. I've heard it said both ways, and found that that one even worked better. And actually, that one did work in fat tissue, unlike
quercetin.
quercetin. Yeah, and so that would have been around, like my introduction would have been between those two time points, somewhere in
Mhm,
that
mhm.
2015 to 2017 time period. And at the time, like, well, this is really cool. Things that are dietary supplements and that are, have been used in natural medicine, look really interesting here. And so, it became a big hobby project of mine to just, stay abreast of it. And yeah, and then I think we like I guess the key things that have come out since then is really any organ system, tissue, health area you can think of that worsens with aging. At this point, I don't know of any that aren't known to be worsened by the accumulation of senescent cells. So we had been
Okay.
talking about ovarian aging, before we
Yes.
started recording.
Yeah.
That would be one. There's not as much research. And the reason is it's senescent cells, there's no blood test you could do and say, oh, like, you have this in your blood, so you have more senescent cells in your ovaries or your brain or your heart, or more just total body wise. They really have to take, samples of tissues, and then the researchers have to know what they're looking for. There's not even one marker. They'll check a couple different things to identify a senescent cell. So because of that, there's been an explosion in research, and most of it's in animals, and there's still lots and lots more room. Like, I know a question I get asked once in a while, well, what about this? Like, do cold plunges help prevent senescent cells? So, like, my intuition, the right amount of that would toughen up cells and help to slow down that
In the wrong
process.
amount.
That might cause more, and no one's done that research. So what
Ah,
we
yeah.
what we do know is that the right amount of exercise in animals tends to make it so that they accumulate fewer senescent cells
Okay.
in muscle tissue, right? But
Okay.
that's the only place they've looked. Does probably bones as well, maybe joints. But it could be that exercise is a great thing for preventing accumulation in some tissues, but not all tissues, which would
Yeah.
make sense because we know even people that have exercise dialed in often will have maybe I remember pretty famous, exercise guru passed away around age 58, and Poliquin was his name. And he'd been on Dave Asprey's podcast a few times, looked fantastic, did all kinds of healthy things. And, some system just wore out faster than his body looked like it was wearing out, is, how it appears, at least, right? I don't know him personally, or, but there's examples, right, of that. People,
Yeah.
super fit athletes, but dying of a heart attack, right? So
Yes.
there's,
Yes. You hear
um,
this.
so my sense is exercise would maybe be somewhat tissue specific for helping
Right.
prevent, but not in all tissues, right? So, so stepping back, what that led me to think is maybe the smartest way is to stack a bunch of different plant compounds that can help with senescent cells, but that, naturopaths, herbalists, and science would know, like, oh, these have kind of different tissue affinities,
Yeah.
if
And
that
so have
makes
you
sense.
researched it in regards to obesity or weight gain? Like, do people that are more prone to gaining weight, or as women age, we know that as they start to lose their hormones, we tend to have more metabolic issues and gain more weight. And so is there more would you think that there was more senescent cells in our fat tissue? Um, and that's kind of feeding into that process?
So what's from animal studies, what would seem to be true is that what senescent cells in adipose tissue, because adipose tissue has more than just fat cells, right? They have immune cells, macrophages, they
Hmm.
have other cells, just like muscle tissue has more than just muscle cells. But the senescent cells that accumulate in adipose tissue secrete a lot of, what you can just think of as inflammatory compounds. When I said like the things they secrete into the microenvironment, think of
Yeah.
those as pro-inflammatory. And so in animals, senescent cells accumulating in adipose tissue drives a lot of the underlying what you'd think of as metabolic obesity, right? Your insulin resistance, your blood sugar, inflammatory markers, things like that. And my guess would be humans, it's, identical, right? So you could have like, think there's always been this concept of like, there's some people that maybe by, BMI obese, but seem healthy, and others, that can be even thinner, like normal weight obesity or normal weight adiposity, right? Like they have, maybe the big belly, but they're thin everywhere else, right? Like they have a lot of characteristics of
Hmm.
metabolic obesity. So my guess would be senescent cells are a big driver of that, but maybe not as much of the amount of fat that we have, but where it's located and whether it's causing problems systemically or not.
Right. And so have you seen that taking some of these plant compounds that target the senescent cells in the fat tissue, do you see it helping anybody with weight loss or the ability to lose weight?
We've not done that research,
No.
nor
Okay.
has anyone that I'm aware of. What I know, I know from animals, and this again is aging animals. So what happens in animals as they age is called anabolic resistance. So think of that as an insulin resistance equivalent, but instead of insulin that the cells are insensitive to, it's anabolic signals. And the main anabolic signals would be things like exercise, like weightlifting
Hmm.
classically.
Hmm.
Getting more protein would be another one that can be really anabolic, certain amino acids. So older animals tend to be anabolically resistant or develop
Yes.
anabolic resistance, right? So what that then happens is their muscles don't grow, they actually shrink, right? As we start to get
Yeah.
older.
Sarcopenia.
Yep, yep. And so, this has been done in a few different animal studies now. So they've looked at, older animals and found that senescent cell accumulation in muscle tissue is a driver of anabolic resistance and doing senolytic.
Ah.
And the most common senolytic stack done in research is the original two that Mayo researchers found, the quercetin stacked with the dasatinib, that taking that orally cleared out some of the senescent cells in muscle tissue, and then they responded like young mice did to anabolic signals, right? So,
Ooh.
so my intuition is that yes, like if you can
Yeah.
clear senescent cells out of tissues, you just start to see better
This roundabout
response.
way. Yes,
Yeah,
yes. Yeah,
but
but
it's
in
it's
general, it's gonna help the whole process so
yeah.
that you don't maybe lose the muscle as fast, which then will help you with insulin sensitivity and not putting on as much weight and losing the muscle.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
And
makes
where
sense.
where we've looked most is it was originally thought like the most likely cell types to become senescent were immune cells,
Mm.
something called fibroblasts, and fibroblasts are our connective tissue cells. So they're located, like in our joints would have fibroblasts, our skin would have fibroblasts. They'd be between, other tissues as well. And then endothelial cells, right? So like the blood vessel cells. And and it so it's been known probably, I would say maybe 8 to 10 years ago, they did an experiment where they basically put senescent cells in the joints, like say the knee joints of animals to see what would happen. And those animals developed, what we would think of as the same types of symptoms that old animals have with their joints, right? Or old humans can
Yeah.
have, right? So it was known like, oh, like senescent cells, not only are they likely to impact the fibroblasts, but they also do something to the chondrocytes, like the joint uh, connective tissue cells as well. And so, joints have been one of the areas that's, I think more well established. So I know with our Qualia Senolytic product, when we originally went to make it, like we always prototype a product first and try to do what we think of as a pilot study. So, and for listeners, that means there's no placebo. We're just giving that product and one, making sure like, do people tolerate this well, right? Or, or is it making them feel awful? And then two, like, is there something that we can assess that will give us an insight? Is this helping people or not?
Yeah.
And that's hard, as I mentioned, with senescent cells, is you can't measure something in the blood. Biopsies is a non-starter, right?
Yeah.
So we decided at that point, well, let's just, we know joints is a big issue in a lot of people that starts with the aging process. Like by 40, some people are already having kind of like things
Oh,
that would be thought of
definitely.
as old joints. So we recruited people with some degree of joint challenges already. We had them take Qualia Senolytic for 2 days, had them take 12 days off, take it for 2 days, 12 days off, and then take a final dose. So that idea of intermittent dosing, so like intermittent
Yes.
fasting, right? Like, and then we just looked what happened on a really commonly used joint health questionnaire, and we saw it was about a 60 to 65% improvement over those 3 dosing cycles.
Wow.
So that was why we launched the product, because it would seem like, okay, it's doing something really useful to at least counteract that symptom of aging in a meaningful way. And since then we've done a placebo controlled study, and the same thing, we recruited people with the same issue, and again saw like about a 65% improvement that was obviously way bigger than placebo.
Wow.
And in that same study, we also saw like a big improvement in people's self-reported energy levels. So those were the kind of the 2 areas we've looked at, and we're repeating that study just to
What about
make sure.
skin?
So
Aging skin.
so in so a lot of the symptoms of aging skin are definitely tied to senescent cells. We've
Okay.
not looked at that ourselves, but my sense would be yes, like that, like there'd be some benefit to that with things like elasticity and other things. And I know one of the things I personally, so I've been taking Qualia Senolytic for a bit over 2 years. You could probably safely say I've taken it longer than any other human
Okay.
since I took the prototypes before we
Yes.
even had
Yeah.
a.
Yeah.
But because of that anabolic resistance, one of the things I know I looked at the time for me was like, oh, how are my muscles responding to the? I use something called the X3 bar. It's just really heavy straps as my main thing, and had kind of plateaued, and it unstuck me within a couple cycles. So the other thing I noticed personally, I don't do a lot of trade shows anymore, but back in that, like fresh out of naturopathic school time period, I worked for Thorne Research
Okay. Yeah.
well, I think they're just called Thorne now.
Yeah.
I was one of their staff docs back in 96, 97. And then when I left to work with the Adamo, I still did a lot of trade shows for them if they were more convenient for me to go to than someone, because back then Thorne was in northern Idaho. So it wasn't the most convenient place to get to things on the East Coast. So I used to do a lot of trade shows back, in through the early 2000s. And even then, as a much younger man, my knees and low back would just, they had a tough time, right? Staying on these
I
floors
hear
for
you.
a couple of
Yes.
days. And so one of the things I did, Dave Asprey's, I was at the Biohacker conference in
Hmm.
Dallas. I guess it was the end of May, beginning of June. I think maybe it was the end of June, but no, yeah, the end of May.
Yeah.
And so I was at the Qualia booth that whole show, because my role would be like, when people have questions beyond what the sales and marketing people, like, send them to Dr. Greg. And
Yeah.
and I was also at what's called Expo West in Anaheim. That's more like a natural products retailer show. But we had a booth there in February. And both of those shows, my knees and back were so much less bothered than they were
Right.
20 years ago. And
Wow.
I think that's, like, to me, the main thing I've done differently is just doing the once a month, the Qualia Senolytic for 2 days. And I think what it's done is just in those areas, I think, were always my Achilles, like the
Yeah.
weak spot, right? Where I would just feel that low kind of grade inflammation
And
earlier.
could you say how old you are now?
Oh, I'm 62.
Okay.
So
Okay. So just to get an idea of, so from 42, which is usually it's our 40s when we really start to feel the joint stuff coming on.
yeah.
And you're
Yeah.
like, what just happened? I just got really old. It feels like
Yeah.
everything starts to hurt.
Yeah. So anyways, that's for me, that's how I feel it. But for listeners, the way I would say is I would think of senescent cells in our tissues, as long as they're below some tipping point, we're probably not going to notice something from that tissue yet. Just like in a
Hmm.
plant, if there's,
Hmm.
a couple yellow leaves, that plant's probably still going to be healthy. It's only when they get a certain amount of yellow leaves that all of a sudden, like, okay, this plant's really hurting.
Hmm.
And so, the key is to keep things below that threshold. And what's definitely been clear in research is that senescent cells accumulate unevenly in tissues, right? Different people will have different weak spots,
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
animals will
Yeah.
have, their own Achilles. And so, um, because of that, there's no really one way that,
Yeah.
like, an accumulation of senescent cells, like someone, maybe it's, their joints, someone else, it's something,
Could be the
what
skin.
their skin, someone else, maybe it's something to do with their brain, right? Like their because we know
Cognition.
that,
Yeah.
yeah, like brain fog or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so energy, right, would be,
Yeah.
I think, part of the reason that energy has been seemingly a signal we've seen when we've done studies is that something about just reducing these or taking the Qualia Senolytic translates into people feeling like they have more energy, which on its own it'd be like, well, that doesn't make sense from taking a lot of physogen or quercetin, but it's what subjectively happens. So, and then you and I had talking before that, and so for listeners, this could be a complete coincidence. So take
Yep.
it for what
Yep.
it's worth. But
So
as
interesting
of
though.
about, we're a mostly remote company at this point. I'm still live near our office, but a lot of the team doesn't. So we got together at the end of February, and I was speaking with our head of customer service, and she's like, Dr. Greg, like, the weirdest thing, like, I've had 5 different women that have called us and said that they'd stopped menstruating, did Qualia Senolytic for a couple months, and their period started again. Like, is that possible? Like, and what do I tell them? And I said, oh, well, my only guess is that, we know that senescent cells play a role in ovarian aging. Maybe there's some rejuvenation going on for women that had recently stopped menstruating, right?
The
So
menopause. Yeah.
yeah, that had, entered menopause and now, like, somehow rejuvenated that system enough that, anyways, it's, like I said, could be
That's
a
interesting.
coincidence,
Yeah.
but
But there
um,
was research when I was looking this up. There was something about senolytic cells and them being in a more in abundance in women that had fertility problems in their ovaries, something like that. Like there was some sort of a connection with it, and it was just mostly about fertility. I was trying to find things on menopause and just the hormonal loss piece, and all I could find was how things like estrogen can help with uh, resisting the development of senolytic cells, but there was stuff on fertility and senescent cells. And so I think that just makes sense to me. We would have them in the ovaries, and then, like you said, taking qualia, it could really look different in every person as to what it does for them, because it could be that it's their brain, it could be that their skin starts to look better, their joint health gets better. It just all depends on where they might have an abundance of senescent cells. That's about
yeah.
right? Yeah.
And like, for me, I've been trying to invest in my health for quite a long time. Even when my
Me
life
as
was
well.
crazy stressful in the Navy, at least in the things I could control, like, I
Yes.
was trying to do my best. And going back to that investment analogy I made earlier, like, when I think of, going back even then, if you had said to, 28-year-old Greg that was getting out of the Navy, like, oh, all right, you have your, like, your dad, this is his life. What do you want yours? And I would have said, oh, something completely different. I want to be the guy when I get to my dad's age that can be doing yoga and that can travel comfortably. And, my dad, unfortunately, by the time he'd have been my age, he was about retired at that. He retired, I think, when he was 63. But at that point, I don't know how he even made it through airports because he was, a big guy then and had really, I mean, he passed away a few years after he retired. His health was already,
Really
um,
bad.
yeah, and not his fault, right? He didn't know what he didn't know. He was a great provider for us, right? So he traded some of his health to make sure that me and my siblings had a great life, right? So, God bless him for that.
Hmm.
But I knew even back then, okay, like I needed to do things differently now to not get where he is at that point. And so, when I think of even Qualia Senolytic for me at this point, I think of it, this is an investment I'm making for 90-year-old Greg, right?
Yeah.
Not so much that, oh, like I need to feel this from taking it this month. That's not the reason I take it.
Yeah.
Now it's nice to have, have some things that were more problematic feel less like an issue now. But for someone that currently has joint issues, then I would expect they would notice within a few cycles. And we started off by, talking about multiple stressors and adaptation and things like that. And one of the things I think that's coolest about Senolytics, as they were originally proposed by the Mayo researchers, is from the get-go, because dasatinib is a really strong medication that would have a lot of potential side effects. They're like, okay, well, what's the best risk reward to approaching these, that stack of quercetin and dasatinib? And they came up with intermittent would be the way to do it, right? Let's do what they called hit and run dosing. Let's do a couple days of this and then take a break for it, and then do a couple days again and take a break. And that just almost embedded itself in the idea of Senolytics. And the reason that makes sense would be like, think of HRT, right? Like, or thyroid medication or insulin for a diabetic. You need to give that compound continuously, right? Because our body needs it continuously. For getting rid of senescent cells, think of that as much more like, oh, I'm a gardener that needs to prune my plants periodically. Like if you over
Right.
prune a plant, you'll kill it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But if you
Yeah.
just periodically prune it, you'll keep it much healthier. So that's the other cool thing about
Yeah. I was going to
Senolytics and
ask you
Qualia
about that. Like, how
and
did it
Qualia.
come about that you only take it? Can you explain how you take it so that people
Yeah,
understand?
yeah. So a box of Qualia is going to come with 12 capsules. They're like this brilliant yellow color, and it's because flavonoids like fisetin and quercetin and curcumin and luteolin are all yellow. So something about that yellow seems to like track with senolytic compounds that come from plants. Um,
Interesting.
and so the way that I take it is the first weekend of every month. I take 6 capsules on Saturday, 6 on Sunday, and then that's it. I don't do it until the next first weekend of the month rolls around. In our studies to date, since people have had a definitive issue that we wanted to see if that changed, we've done it a little less time between those cycles. So what we've done in those is take it for a weekend, take the next, 2 weeks of weekdays off, but then that, second weekend. So basically, like over 5 weeks, they would have done 3 cycles instead of,
Okay.
like my normal over about 5 weeks, I'll have done 2 cycles. And then for a younger person, if someone said, oh, I'm, 30, I want to start investing in this, does it make sense to? Well, you probably don't have many senescent cells. We like don't need to prune as aggressively. Maybe just take it once a quarter or once every 6 months, right? So, like I think our core recommendation is just do it once a month and then just gradually prune away. If a healthcare practitioner wanted to do it more aggressively, we're completely comfortable with that. Oh, we'll just do, it every other weekend instead of once a month. And then once get, 3 or 4 cycles of that, then maybe slow it down to once a month, but just kind of,
Hmm.
take it on a person by person basis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never come across a supplement that recommended 2 days out of a month to take the supplement. I
Yeah.
really like that because, as you know, we can get overburdened with supplements trying to take care of our health, which is then a stressor.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think is like an important framework, it wasn't, I don't think I don't know personally the Mayo researchers, so I've not been able to ask them this, but we know that things like quercetin and fisetin, luteolin, they seem to all work on nutrient sensing pathways. And they're basically, think of like these senescent cells as stressing their or sensing their environment, and then based on that, changing their mind about whether they should linger in tissues or finally go away. And those compounds, when given in high doses, because it takes a pretty high amount of this, much more than you'd get from eating an onion of quercetin, as an example, to get it to change its mind. And so one of the things, and this goes back to probably around the Civil War time in the US, mid 1800s or so, but it became known as the Weber-Fechner law, I think, is if you Wikipedia'd it. But the gist of it is that that our senses, right, so like vision and hearing being the most studied, don't respond to quantities of things. They respond to proportional change. So the way to think about this would be, okay, you go into the darkest closet in your home, completely black, and if you light one candle, that one candle made a big difference, right? Our visual system noticed a huge change. Now, if you went into that same closet and there was 99 candles already lit and you light one, we may not notice almost anything, right? So one candle never means anything. It's the proportional change, right? Like the ratio of how something changes in the environment that matters. And we know that with our senses, right? If you could hold a sound unchanging, our brain will ignore it really quickly.
Yep.
If you can hold something right in front of the eye and not have the eye move away from it, then really quickly our brain will ignore that, right? So unchanging signals get ignored, right? We know that from our senses.
Yes.
And the things that cells use to sense their environment are receptors, but they're like our ears and eyes are our receptors, right? And so I've never seen anyone try to see like, oh, did they also work on that same principle? But they must, right?
Yeah.
And so that idea of proportional change, like creating a big signal, is what causes things to respond, right? It's why, often when someone changes from whatever they're doing to something new, their health gets better temporarily, right? Because they change, right?
Yes.
So that's also one of the reasons, like, I really think that Senolytics should be given in this way, because these plant compounds are really causing cells to sense something really different in their environment. But if instead we took those, say, like one of those capsules and gave it every day over 30 days, now we're like the 99 candles in the closet, right? We're almost, so long story short, I think we can become the equivalent of resistant to anything, right?
I think so too.
The way that we mitigate that is by doing things somewhat intermittently. So, I've seen things that are sold as Senolytics on the market, and it would be like, oh, well, do this every day, through the month.
Take
It's
how
like,
many capsules a day?
that's, even if it would have a Senolytic compound in it, that's not probably going to do much, because we need to create that massive signal, like that big enough change in the environment around cells
Big surprise to the cell.
that they change their mind and think, and like, I know for me, I often try to look at things through an evolutionary lens, and it's like, okay, well, when is there any time that our ancient ancestors would have seen a massive increase in things like fisetin and quercetin in their diet? And I would say the answer is yes. And so, like I mentioned, that quercetin accumulates in the parts of the onion we throw out, right? The outer skin and the things the frilly things at the bottom, right? Now there's some quercetin in the pulp, but any polyphenols are plant defense compounds, so they always concentrate where the environment most hits that, right?
Right.
So like resveratrol in the skins of a grape, would concentrate more than in the flesh. Fisetin is found in strawberries, but really small amounts. But it's also like, tree bark, leaves, like, again, like those things. So there was something in World War II called the Dutch famine winter, for listeners. And the gist of it was Nazi Germany basically cut off this part of the Netherlands. And for history buffs, if I'm saying any of this wrong, please forgive me. So, but the gist of it was they couldn't get food in into that area. So that famine winter is a pretty well studied thing. I remember reading it about it, and one of the things they did is like they were using leaves and bark and like anything to put into their stomachs, right? So
And book glue. Did you know
yeah,
that?
yeah,
Glue
and
from
leather,
books.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
They
yeah,
would eat it.
and so my sense is the only time we would have massive changes in the amounts of these would have been like signaling a famine. And in a famine, just like a lot of the intermittent fasting um, approaches, like a fasting mimicking diet, all of those tend to, at a minimum, upregulate autophagy,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
And it's almost like there's a like cells have this hidden intelligence that, oh, like the environment's not looking that friendly. We're not getting enough adequate food. So I better recycle the things that are least important for survival, which, autophagy is going to find then the damaged proteins and mucked up organelles and recycle those. And my thought is that senescent cells, which, it's like autophagy is like autophagy can help prevent a cell from becoming senescent, but once a cell's senescent, autophagy is just going to keep repairing it, right? But the senescent cells probably respond somewhat in the same way that, oh, like, all right, I'm a less, useful cell. The environment looks really impoverished now. Like, I guess I should change my mind and finally sacrifice myself for the better good kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? So, anyways, because of that, I also think it's important to get this change signal, right? That cells will sense like, oh, the environment's looking impoverished a bit. I should use that as an opportunity to get rid of things that aren't as important.
Yeah, I agree. And I always cycle almost everything that I do for that purpose because I do think that there's this adaptation that happens and then you just don't get the same effects. So, except for certain hormones I give breaks with, other ones I don't. Uh, Mostly just because of evolutionary once again and just kind of going what does our body naturally do. One thing is we produce estrogen daily uh, as fertile women, but progesterone we don't. And so I do cycle the progesterone even in menopause, but I don't cycle my estrogen. But I cycle it I shouldn't say that. I take it every day and I do cycle it so that there's some days where I have more because it creates different things in the system. And so I love looking at it from that lens of the ups and downs and how important that is. And for some things like this, that you completely remove it for a period of time. And it's much easier for people to take that way as well. Like, I think it's so great. It's like, well, why wouldn't you? It's 2 days out of the month and look
Yeah.
at what it's doing for you, you know? And so the ingredients inside Qualia, is it a whole bunch of different plant compounds then that act on different areas in the body?
So it's a combination of ones with different tissues and ones that support different mechanisms. So like the dasatinib had a different mechanism than quercetin in that original study.
Hmm, hmm.
And so, one of maybe the most common thing we get asked is, why did you put soy? I think it's listed as soy seed extract or something, but it's basically
Yeah,
soy isoflavones
yeah.
in it. And it's because genistein and diadzine they work on some of those same cellular mechanisms, right? Um, it would be a specific type of tyrosine kinase inhibitor. And so some of the things are to impact things other than those same nutrient sensing pathways. So Vicetin, quercetin, luteolin all kind of work on a very specific nutrient sensing pathway, among other things. Piperlongamine, which is something found in Ayurvedic plant called long pepper, a relative of black pepper, but piperlongamine wouldn't be found in black pepper. That
Hmm.
works on completely different areas of getting a senescent cell to change its mind. So we both tried to stack things that had different like complementary mechanisms, but also different tissues that either in for some things like as I mentioned, quercetin didn't have an impact in fat tissue in that original Mayo work, but did in endothelial cells. Vicetin did have an impact in fat tissue. Um, curcumin, as an example, we know impacts, joints and cognition. There's an ingredient in Qualia Senolytic called Senactive. That's a combination of nodo ginseng, which is a relative of Panax ginseng, and then another one that's called sweet chestnut rose. And that extract's been studied for senescent cells being removed from muscle tissues. So yeah, when
Wow.
I put the product together, the goal was, let's stack things to give as
Mhm.
broad tissue support as we know, given the research to date, rather than we'll just dial down on Fisetin and call it a day. So
Yeah. I mean, I originally started to take it for the energy piece because I had heard it was great for that, and then the nootropic piece as well. Um, and I've been trying out so many new things that I don't know what's doing what right now, but I feel like I'm definitely feeling great. I'm sleeping better than ever, and all these things like have been getting better. So I think that that's going to be part of it for sure. Um, yeah, the 2 days out of the month, I think is just so great, and I remember looking when I first got the package going, 2 days out of the month, and then looking at what was in it and going, "Oh, this is some of these things I've never heard of before," and I never went and looked any of it up. I just was like, "I'm just gonna trust in taking the product because I usually do, because I wanna know what it is that I'm taking and why I'm taking it and what's it gonna be good for, so that maybe I could just even get some placebo effect from it, right? So that's really interesting to know, and I have to say you've done such a great job of really dumbing all of this down for the layperson to understand it. Because I was really worried actually about coming into this interview because I really wanted people to understand the importance of it. But I knew that it was a lot of science behind it. And, when I was doing my deep dive on it, a lot of it went over my head. And I consider myself pretty smart. And so I was like, okay, how are we going to do this? And I am glad that I just counted on you to do it for me
oh,
because you've done a really good job. Like it was
thank
really
you.
interesting and it was very easy to understand for me. And I think for my listeners as well. So I really appreciate that. Now we've got, of course, a great deal for all the listeners. If you guys go to neurohacker.com/hormone, you can get 15% off any of the products. So I'm going to link to that in the show notes. I'd love to hear from people too. Like, what is it that you notice? Because as we've talked about here today, it could be multiple different areas of your body that you can feel an improvement on. Can you just, is there things that you constantly hear besides the energy piece?
The Students, I don't work as much directly with
Right,
customers,
right,
so
with
only when I
customers,
get,
yeah.
yeah. So I had our studies, and so joints and energy is what we've looked at mostly for that.
Yes.
The other thing that we've seen a big change in both studies to date is what you'd think of as the emotional well-being component types of
Ah,
questions, right? Like how are like mood, and
mood,
how are your,
happiness.
yeah, and how are your emotions impacting your ability to have the quality of life? We've seen huge changes in those in our studies.
Wow.
So
That's great. Yeah. And one of the things I talked about on that podcast that I just did is I talked about what was most important for me right now in improving health. And I'd have to say so many of what you're talking about is what I am trying to get more of, which is I want more energy. So in mitochondrial health. And then also mood things, like just what makes me happy, and what can I do, even what can I take to help improve my levels of happiness and just just how good I feel, how do I feel, how do I feel emotionally? And so I didn't know that that was something that you guys had heard but lots of before. So
yeah, and the then I've heard, like, from, like, I know a friend that he does a lot of they foster dogs, so he does a lot with walking, playing with those dogs that they're fostering. And I know he had told me at one point it was like being able to throw more comfortably. He'd had like a kind of
oh,
something in that like upper back area that was just restrictive, that seemed like got better within a few boxes of Qualia Senolytic. So but again, like, my, what I would say for listeners is, my personal thing is I just do it as an investment for the future. I didn't
Yep.
expect necessarily to feel anything. If you have something that's already, and aging affects, as listeners would know, like pretty much every part of our body, and we often age unevenly, right? So if someone's already experiencing something, that would be the area most to pay attention to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Makes sense. All right. Dr. Kelly, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was really interesting and I appreciate your time.
oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.